What was the wildest way you found out you were being cheated on? Her parents told me. Parents. She demanded to read all the messages on my phone. I said no problem, but only if I could read the messages on hers. She had forgotten to delete a message from a guy saying, "All we ever do is FK. Can't we hang out sometime?" There was nothing on my phone. He apparently wrote an address wrong, and the love letter he wrote was returned to our home. It was a great way to come back from vacation. She tasted like smoke, but was a non-smoker. Date night cancelled day of. I decided to make it a guy's night to see the new Marvel movie at the time. As we entered, I saw her sitting at the theater snuggling up with a guy. Our seats were a few rows back, saw them kiss a couple times. When we all left at the end of the movie, they were exiting their aisle as we walked down the stairs. She absolutely froze when she saw me. Blocked her on everything while I'm in parking lot. On my birthday I was with my GF and I passed out early since I had a long-ass shift that day, and I had to drive 2 hours to get to her place. Woke up in the middle of the night, went outside to get a smoke, saw her screwing her ex in his car on the parking lot. I joked about knowing she was cheating. She broke down and admitted it. My entire friend group knew about it, and I only found out after the one real homie blackmailed her into admitting it. And when she did, it was the most insincere shit ever. It's no big deal, everyone else thinks it's okay, and stuff like that. Suffice to say, I got my ass out of that relationship and friendship group real quick. Not me, but my dad. His girlfriend at the time had been cheating on him with his friend, who didn't know they were in a relationship. My dad found out when his friend told him he was gonna propose to her. One of her friends was a photographer and wanted to do tasteful nudes, which apparently includes penetration, and multiple days of getting the right shot. We had a shared Google Drive, which her friend didn't know we shared. I went on a 2-week holiday, and when I returned he was acting really strange. I tried to ask him what was wrong and why he was acting off. He started an argument with me, told me I was too young and insecure, asked me to leave, didn't want to see me again. I left sobbing, totally confused. 9 months later I see him walking through the city with his ex and a newborn baby. Now I understand. Edit. Thank you so much for all the love and the laughs you've given me about it in the comments. I was 18 and he was older, so of course I was smitten. It stung at the time, but I got over it. It's a funny story I tell at the bar every now and then. He did me such a favor. I'd have probably got stuck in my hometown if I'd stayed with him. Life is so short, throw yourself at it and appreciate every feeling you get. He was drunk at his 21st, and while joking around with his friends he started listing off all the women he'd slept with in the last year. I was standing right there, and we'd been dating for 2 years at that point. My 9-year-old son told me that there were strange men in the house when I was away working. She'd been at it for years. It's horrible to deal with at the time, but honestly, it's such a relief to be rid of such a toxic mess. Broke up with me, and as I was going though deleting her socials, I noticed a post she made on her Snap story that was her and a guy with a post saying, "With my king." Post was made 2 hours ago and had only broke up an hour ago. He sent me a pic of the dog while I was away with a text that said, "Look how cute she looks." Like 3 weeks later I went back to the photo to show a friend, and upon looking at the photo again I noticed a pair of women's boots in the background by the door. Her other boyfriend, who I didn't know existed, and I had a mutual friend who put 2 and 2 together and told me. I said I wanted to meet him, so he called him over. We talked out some things and then called her together at my suggestion. Good times were had by all -1. Not really wild, but my ex-wife and I owned a small business together. One day I noticed a strange email address on the office computer. Her first name and a different last name. I realized that email was still logged in, so I took a peek. I found 2 years worth of emails between my ex and some dude she dated before me. So I printed out every email and had it bound in a binder ready to present to my divorce lawyer. My fire alarm woke me up when it was low on batteries at 5 a.m. and thought it was strange that my GF wasn't home yet. She was out drinking with her friend. I tried to call her, but she didn't answer. That's when I remembered that we had the friend's spare key. She lived like next house, so I went to check and my GF was sleeping in her friend's bed with some guy. If the fire alarm didn't woke me, I think I would NT have ever known. And yet again, fire alarms save lives. Came home off a deployment. Now, ex-wife was acting really weird, but I figured it was because I had been gone for a year and everything was just taking time to get reacquainted. About 3 days after I returned, I had a notice from my unit stating my vehicle had 3 tickets at another base. We were in Germany, a few hours away in the past few months. When I went in to find out what the deal was, all 3 had photos attached to them for speeding through a checkpoint. All 3 had my wife and some other guy. She was kissing him in the 3rd pic. He was driving my car. Had one of those catching up phone calls with a girl I used to be good friends with. Told her all about my girlfriend during the conversation. The next day, I'm supposed to see my girlfriend and she cancels on me. No big deal. A couple hours later, my old friend starts texting me asking me questions about my girlfriend. She ends up telling me she's pretty sure my girlfriend is in the back seat of a car with her and that my girl's been all over her boyfriend's brother and they're all on their way to the movies now. I try calling her and texting to confront her. She calls me back and breaks up with me. The cherry on top is my girlfriend and I work together, and the guy she's cheating with is my manager. She ends up quitting not long after, but I have to work with this guy for another year before I change jobs. Lol. I was visiting a dying relative in hospital, so could not attend some stupid college party he and his roommate organized. I told him I couldn't go and asked him if he could come over later, after visiting hours in the hospital, because I knew my relative would die soon and I really just needed someone to be there with me. He said he probably wouldn't be able to, as he needed to help his roommate with party preparations, but would come over later if they finish early. Next day I saw pictures of him with his ex in his lap, kissing, uploaded the previous night by his roommate. The roommate even knew we were dating. He was just too drunk to realize he added me as a friend a week earlier on Facebook and I would see the pictures. My colleague had an elaborate wedding, cathedral ceremony, hundreds of guests, to a guy she'd been with for years. She found out shortly afterwards he'd been cheating because they met this girl, who was his colleague and gym buddy, when they were walking in the park and the 2 French bulldogs, who were noisy and protective, didn't bark at her at all. There was no reason for her to have met the dogs before, as she had never been to their house to her knowledge. So she snooped on his phone while he was asleep, and apparently he had been cheating for over a year and she was pregnant, and they were opening a business together and he was leaving as soon as he had the whole thing set up. When the dust settled, the only thing she was pissed off about was the expense they and her parents had spent on the wedding. He could have called the whole thing off and saved thousands. She didn't learn though. Her second wedding was nearly as elaborate. That's some Sherlock Holmes level reasoning. She didn't realize that her iPhone messages were also synchronized to her Mac, which I was using to stream movies on. I saw texts popping up with her writing to her ex about how she loved taking his load on her face. I just packed up my shit and left. Had a dog who would chew up my wife's panties whenever we had sex. After 7 years of marriage and 2 kids, the sex was very infrequent, and then one day I found a pair of chewed panties. And then a few days later, another pair. Well, somebody is having sex, and it ain't me. His sister kept calling me Annie, and my name is Andy, short for Andrea. I corrected her a few times, but I didn't care for her at all, so after I ignored her since I thought she was trying to be obnoxious. We only saw her once a week or so. Then I find out after almost a year that he was cheating. Only I was the mistress because he had been with Annie for 3 years and they had a child together. I still don't know if his sister was calling me Annie to laugh behind my back or to make him uncomfortable. Probably both. It must have been hilarious to her. Anyway, he used to drive my car all the time, and one day I was out running errands and came out of the store to find a woman with her toddler standing by the car. I asked her if I could help her and she said, "No, I'm just trying to find out what store my boyfriend is in. This is his car." So yeah, we both learned a lot that day. We hung out all day together comparing stories of times he was unreachable. Then we confronted him together. He walked into her apartment and sat down on the couch with a beer, before noticing I was standing there with her in the kitchen. He said nothing, just put the beer down, got up and left, ignoring both of us as we peppered him with questions. This was about 13 years ago and I haven't spoken to him since. She stayed with him. She was 6 months pregnant the day I met her, found out about her. I had just gotten home for 3 weeks summer holidays. I hadn't been home or seen my wife for a few weeks, so I was excited to get home. It was on the Saturday night and I could sense she was awake into the small hours on her phone. At 4:30 a.m. she got up out of bed and said she was going to pick her brother up from a party. COVID lockdown had just ended, so everyone was partying. We have 2 young kids, so we didn't go out. She comes home just over an hour later and jumps into bed wearing sexy underwear, which was the opposite of what she went to bed wearing. Married men will understand. I woke up with the kids at 7 and the whole situation didn't sit right with me. I took the dashcam footage from the car and loaded it onto the computer. There it was, clear as day. Some dude who did not look like her brother at all was thankful she came to pick him up, and they flirted in the car for a bit before dropping him off at his house. It was difficult to watch, but when I confronted her she broke down and confessed. 2 weeks later and the car was sold. 6 weeks after that the house was sold. A year later and were divorced. It was a tough point of my life, but thank God for that dashcam. Saved me wasting more time of my life with a woman that didn't value me as much as I valued her. I've now moved on with an absolutely fantastic woman and I have my life back, but better. When I was 14 and just got my life uprooted to move to the other end of the state for my dad's new job, I was searching through his briefcase in hopes of finding, and taxing, one of his cigarettes. I was a shit kid. Instead I found a whole pack of developed photos of him and some woman, not my mum, in multiple positions having sex. There was also an A4-sized handwritten song he'd written to the gist of, FCK, everything I have I want you and nothing else. I was literally shocked. I found my older sister and just shoved it all in her face so she could see what had taken away my ability to verbalize what my problem was. Poor thing, I didn't mean to share the trauma. Long story short, we decided to tell my aunt, my mum's sister, so she could break it to my mother, as neither of us had the heart to directly tell mum, or the spine to confront our dad. Plus I was in the wrong for being a shit human being for rifling through his things to begin with. That event really messed with me for years. Issues with trust, men, self-esteem, etc. My parents split and divorced. I now have a sister 21 years younger than me and my dad is still married to that woman. She's a bit of a bitch and not my cup of tea, but I've never mentioned knowing or seeing what I saw to any of them, so to this day only my siblings, not the half-sister, know. The Honda app on your car screen gives you a most recently visited place overview that connects to your Google. I went away for basic and 8, and at the end of basic training, when we got our phones back for an extended time, it gave me the most visited places. It was another apartment complex I didn't recognize, but Google Maps had a picture of his car there. He had emotionally cheated before, so I kinda knew because none of friends had mentioned living there, and it would be a got there at 7 or 8 p.m. and then leaving for his classes in the morning for school without going back to our apartment 2x a week. Wife and I were getting intimate. I felt a string inside her, which was weird, since I'd had a vasectomy a year before, after our second child was born. I said, "What is that string? Do you have an IUD?" To which she paused, then replied, "It's a science experiment." I had suspect she was screwing another dude, but I was still so shocked at her bizarre explanation, I just had to laugh. I think I then sarcastically commended her commitment to the advancement of science. Met in opposite directions on escalators. She was in his arms and could only mouth sorry as we passed each other. I had suspicions and finally broke down and went through her phone. She was chatting with him through Words with Friends.